Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm John Dickerson in Chicago on the third day of the Democratic National Convention. For the past 2 days, delegates have stayed up well into the evening to hear from the party's last two successful presidential candidates, outgoing President Joe Biden and his former boss, President Barack Obama. Tonight, they will finally hear the first extended remarks from the current ticket. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz will introduce himself to Democratic voters as he formally accepts the party's nomination for president. Walz, the high school social studies teacher and football coach turned congressman turned governor of a reliably Democratic state, will speak to the largest audience of his career. Also speaking tonight, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and the 42nd President Bill Clinton, who 32 years ago was introduced to delegates as their nominee as the Man from Hope, the name of his Arkansas hometown. Hope also made a comeback last night in the remarks of former President Obama and his wife, Michelle.
We're feeling it here in this arena, but it's spreading all across this country we love. It's the contagious power of hope.
I am feeling hopeful because this convention has always been pretty good to kids with funny names who believe in a country where anything is possible.
And CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang joins me now to talk about the night of Tim Walz. What are we expecting from the Minnesota governor?
So we already know the governor's resume, which on paper is extraordinary. He has an amazing story, but he has to bring that to life and talk about his experience as a member of the National Guard, as a teacher, as a football coach, as a congressman, and talk about how that perspective could translate into helping Americans, and that's what he wants to do. He's going to draw on his roots growing up in Nebraska on a farm and talk about those values, which we've heard snippets of already, right? But I expect he will go deeper and talk about it more personally to try to allow people in on his life experience, and he will have a lot of help. There's going to be 14 old football players that he coached on stage with him. One of them will be introducing him, and so they'll be able to talk about how he changed their lives, made it better, and how they argue he could do it for everybody. So I think it's going to be a big night for the governor, who we already know is quite jolly and happy and go lucky, but is that enough to make a difference? We'll see.
Jolly is a beautifully deployed word because he does have a sort of old St. Nick kind of jolliness to him. You were in Milwaukee. We talked to you yesterday in Milwaukee. What was that like? And how much is Walz a part of that, or is it all love for the nominee, Vice President Harris?
So it was extraordinary because the arena was packed with 18,000 people. And I've been to several rallies now with both Walz and Harris. And yesterday, he actually came out by himself before we laid eyes on the vice president. And the crowd was, roaring. They were very welcoming, embracing of him because, again, he doesn't have any problems when it comes to likability. We just have a new CBS News poll that came out an hour ago that shows among registered Democrats, 60% are enthusiastic about Walz compared to 51% of Republicans for J.D. Vance. So the question is whether that enthusiasm is going to make a difference when it comes to looking at the ticket. As you very well know, the vice presidential pick doesn't, make that much of an impact on election day, but it could do harm. And right now, they're trying to prevent any kind of harm to really get supporters to buy into Walz to like him even more.
Right. It reflects back on the person at the top of the ticket and the message they're trying to sell, which is what we'll try and figure out of tonight's events. Final question, Weijia, your normal job is to cover the White House president, who should be the nominee. What role is Biden going to have in this campaign, if any?
Well, I think he already played the ultimate role, John, which was to step aside and allow the vice president to rise to the top of the ticket. But it is not lost on the party that all of the delegates that will fill this room, that have been filling this room, voted for Joe Biden. And so to that extent, he will continue to rally for her. He will participate in campaign events for her to try to relay the message that she will now take on my agenda, my legacy, and that she is his surrogate now. And so that support is still incredibly important for Democrats who were excited about him and might not have been there yet for her. So we do expect that he will continue to play a role. But, after he appeared on night one here, he left, and that was an intentional move. He's on vacation now in Southern California, just taking it all in because, of course, he has a lot to process still. Even though he passed on the figurative torch, this was not easy for him. And so I think after his time off, he will hit the campaign trail for Harris.
White House correspondent Weijia Zhang. Thanks a lot, Weijia.
Sure.
Just a few miles from the United Center here, police released dozens of protesters who took part in a Tuesday night rally outside the Israeli consulate in downtown Chicago. Police held them overnight at a temporary courthouse set up specifically for DNC-related arrests. Authorities said they began arresting the protesters after they turned violent and that the group did not have a permit to protest, unlike the other organizations. I want to now bring in my colleague, Lindsay Reiser, from our studio in New York. Lindsay, you've got the rest of the highlights from today, including what's been going on with the Trump campaign. So over to you.
That's right. Thanks, John. We'll see you back here later this hour. Former President Donald Trump spoke at a rally in North Carolina earlier today. It was his first outdoor rally since the assassination attempt on his life during a similar event in Butler, Pennsylvania last month. His event today, alongside his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, is part of a packed week of campaign events meant to counter the Democratic National Convention during Trump's remarks. During Trump's remarks, he called out his White House predecessor.
Did you see Barack Hussein Obama last night? Take little shots. He was taking shots at your president. And so was Michelle. They always say, sure, please stick to policy. Don't get personal. And yet they're getting personal all night long, these people. Do I still have to stick to policy?
CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane is following the Trump campaign from North Carolina. So, Scott, the president talked about some foreign policy, his America First agenda. He also riled the crowd when asked if he should avoid personal attacks. What are some of your key takeaways from today?
This was a campaign event that the campaign said would be focused on defense and military issues. And at times it was, but he really did meander his way through these 50 to 60 minutes of remarks, often deviating from the teleprompter and often interjecting some cutting criticisms of the Democratic convention speakers, including President Biden, calling him old and saying it was too angry. He did criticize the Obamas for their blistering criticisms of him. And there were these moments in which he just seemed to fade from topic to topic, which is to a degree consistent at Trump rallies. But at this one, there were some noticeable differences. First of all, the setup. It was a bit smaller, more compact with tighter security. You could see the bulletproof glass bowl that surrounded the stage and the podium. There were these containers stacked up. The roofs were being manned. There was drone surveillance, we've learned. And there was a smaller crowd. This was a crowd you can measure maybe in the hundreds, maybe 1,000 or two, much smaller than the crowd at Butler, Pennsylvania, July 13th. But there was this symmetry, Lindsay, between that event and this one. The political complexion of Asheboro, North Carolina, very similar to Butler. The makeup of the stage, the way the flag was hung with cranes diagonally above the stage, almost an exact replica of Butler as he returns to these open-air rallies between now and November 5th.
Let's talk about North Carolina. It's a swing state. Trump carried it in 2016 and 2020. How is he doing there now, and what are the issues driving voters there?
All kinds of campaigns like to talk all kinds of confident speak about where they're going to try to play, in what states they're going to try to win. Measure them by the amount of money and the amount of time they put into a state. And both campaigns, Lindsay, are putting a lot of money and a lot of time into North Carolina, an indication they recognize this is a key battleground state, not just a battleground state. The Trump campaign thought this is the right place to talk about the military in a state that's home to Camp Lejeune and Fort Liberty, but they also recognize that North Carolina represents what other battleground states represent, states that are winnable on other issues, including the economy, inflation. The vice president's campaign would argue this is winnable on the issue of women's reproductive rights and democracy. We'll see how much more time both sides play in North Carolina, but they've all been here a lot. And I can tell you, Lindsay, having been on the ground here, this state is just saturated with campaign ads.
I'm sure residents there are looking forward to this election being over. Scott McFarland, thank you. There were noticeable differences at Trump's rally today as a result of the security failures that allowed for the assassination attempt on July 13th. So for more on this, CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Skanga joins me now. Nicole, Scott touched on it a little bit. We saw the bulletproof glass, usually a level of security reserved for sitting presidents. What were some of the other security changes?
Lindsay, good to be with you. You heard it from Scott, counter sniper teams in the wings, and we saw those teams deployed for former President Trump's for the first time this campaign cycle on July 13th. But what wasn't at that rally in Butler ahead of the assassination attempt, but was here today, counter drone assets, drone technology, advanced counter surveillance teams. U.S. Secret Service had boots on the ground of today's event site a full week ago, conducting a sort of robust walkthrough that frankly didn't take place leading up to July 13th, according to law enforcement sources. A note on that ballistic glass you mentioned: when former President Donald Trump stepped on stage today in Asheboro, North Carolina, it was the first time he was surrounded by that sort of armored shield since January 2021, that heavily rated glass-clad polycarbonate material, so heavy that Secret Service now has to pre-position those shields in battleground states so it's ready to deploy to the former president campaign events. The only others you'll see protected by it, you mentioned the sitting president and vice president.
Nicole, you have been reporting that a great deal of focus on this investigation into what went wrong is communication and the lack thereof between Secret Service and local law enforcement. I understand there's a new committee that's going to look into this. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Lindsay, this is key. The Department of Homeland Security is working with the Secret Service to establish a committee that will be tasked with creating a uniform communication channel. What does that mean? A single radio frequency that U.S. Secret Service, federal law enforcement partners, local and state law enforcement officials assisting the agency could use to communicate with one another in real time. Notably, on July 13th, and the acting Secret Service Director Ronald Rowe has conceded this, that sort of uniform communication did not exist. Those communication problems delayed critical information from being relayed to the Secret Service about the gunman. The panel still being assembled. It will be led by Heather Fong. She's the acting assistant secretary for the Office of State and Local Law Enforcement within DHS. She's also a former San Francisco chief of police. I also want to point out other agencies within DHS routinely assist the U.S. Secret Service. And this week, we also learned that the U.S. Coast Guard has established 3 security zones in the waters surrounding Mar-a-Lago in order to assist in bolstering that security footprint around the former president. Of course, the DNC happening now. We're seeing a lot of those 3-letter DHS components on the ground: CBP, ICE, HSI, sort of an all-of-government approach here.
Are the security measures that we saw today precautionary given just the heightened threat environment?
Yeah, the Secret Service has repeatedly stated that they work every day to ensure the highest level of safety and security for the people and places they protect. It is the case that prior to July 13th, the agency became aware of a heightened Iranian threat stream targeting the former president. And since then, the detail has been requesting and in some case receiving more assets for the former president, even amid this immense operational failure in Butler, Pennsylvania. It's also the case that prior to July 13th, prior to local police spotting the assailant on site on that day, Thomas Crooks was not on the radar of federal, state, or local law enforcement, and concerns about that kind of under-the-radar lone wolf attack persists. Law enforcement officials have called July 13th a wake-up call, and amid this very complex threat environment that we're in right now, today's precautionary measures could become tomorrow's operational response. Lindsay?
Nicole Skanga, thank you.
Thank you.
The U.S. added far fewer jobs during most of 2023 and part of 2024 than was previously reported. According to revised government data, the economy actually added 2.1 million jobs in the 12 months that ended with March. The growth was overstated by roughly 818,000. This was a routine revision the government does every year to account for late data. The new numbers showed the economy was weaker than expected, a signal that the Fed could cut interest rates next month in its inflation fight. Former President Bill Clinton is set to speak at the DNC for the 12th consecutive time tonight. We'll discuss his history at the DNC and how political conventions have evolved throughout history in both parties. Plus, an update from the luxury yacht that sank off the coast of Italy earlier this week. We'll tell you what rescue teams discovered today after the break. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
President Biden spoke with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu Wednesday to discuss a ceasefire in Gaza and hostage release deal. Vice President Kamala Harris also joined the call. The call took place just a day after Secretary of State Antony Blinken left the region after holding high-stakes peace talks with fellow mediators Egypt and Qatar. Until a deal is reached, fears remain of a wider regional war. On Wednesday, Lebanon's Hezbollah fired more than 50 rockets into the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights. The Iranian-backed group says the attack was in retaliation to an Israeli strike inside Lebanon a day earlier. Meanwhile, a commercial ship traveling through the Red Sea came under repeated attack Wednesday, according to Britain's military. It is suspected to be the latest attack by Yemen's Houthi rebels. The group has been targeting ships in response to Israeli attacks in Gaza. No casualties were reported in the recent attack. The Russian military says it downed 45 Ukrainian drones targeting Moscow overnight. It's one of the largest attacks by Ukraine since the war began in 2022. The assault came as Ukrainian forces begin to slow their offensive in Russia's Kursk region. U.S. officials say Ukraine has started to transition from advancing forward to holding the land it has already captured. And Russian troops are quickly pushing in on the key Ukrainian stronghold of Pokrovsk in the southeast. Ukraine has ordered evacuations for tens of thousands still living in the area. Divers have recovered 5 bodies in the search of the wreckage of that luxury yacht that sank off the coast of Italy. According to Britain's Telegraph newspaper, 2 of the victims found were British mogul Mike Lynch, who owned the super yacht and also was acquitted in June in the U.S. on fraud charges, as well as his 18-year-old daughter. A search for the last remaining bodies will resume tomorrow. 22 people total were on the yacht when it was struck by bad weather Monday. 15 people managed to escape. A work stoppage could begin tomorrow at Canada's 2 main rail companies if they can't reach new labor deals with the Teamsters Union. The Canadian National Railway and Canadian Pacific Kansas City plan to lock out workers as negotiations remain deadlocked. Major sticking points for the union include better wages and benefits, provisions for fatigue management, and improved crew scheduling. In remarks Wednesday, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called on the railways and the Teamsters to work out their differences to avoid a potential economic impact that could be in the billions.
My message is very straightforward. It is in the best interest of both sides to continue doing the hard work at the table to find a negotiated resolution. Millions of Canadians, of workers, of farmers, of businesses right across the country are counting on both sides to do the work and get to a resolution.
75% of the goods exported from Canada to the U.S. are sent via train. A prolonged shutdown could disrupt shipments on a wide range of goods, including coal, timber, grains, and beans. Former President Bill Clinton is one of the marquee speakers taking the podium at the Democratic National Convention tonight. It will be his 12th speech at the event. His first came 44 years ago in 1980 as the 33-year-old governor of Arkansas. Here are some highlights from conventions past.
I thank you for supporting the new Democratic agenda that has taken our country to new heights of prosperity, peace, and progress. As always, of course, the lion's share of the credit goes to the American people who do the work, raise the kids, and dream the dreams. Senator Obama's life is a 21st century incarnation of the old-fashioned American dream. His achievements are proof of our continuing progress toward the more perfect union of our founders' dreams.
Doug Brinkley joins us now from Chicago. He is the Catherine Sanoff Brown Chair in Humanities and a professor of history at Rice University. Doug, thanks for being here. When Clinton won the presidential election in '92, the Democratic Party was deeply divided. It had lost 5 of the last 6 presidential elections. How would you compare the division within the party then and now and the country at large?
Well, Bill Clinton did something quite miraculous. He started defining himself as a new Democrat, meaning after Walter Mondale lost in 1984 and Dukakis in '88, Clinton started saying, I'm something different. I'm not a liberal. I have different concerns. But really, his '92 convention speech is one of the masterpieces in political theater. He ended up getting the highest spike out of a convention in polling because of the speech he gave. And people started, everybody knew, he could deliver a great speech, but '92 put him into the stratosphere. And of course, he goes on to beat George Herbert Walker Bush and the third party candidate, Ross Perot.
You know the Clintons well. What can we expect to hear tonight?
Well, when I got to Chicago, I got Sunday on the 18th, I had a meal after a chat with President Clinton and Hillary Clinton, with Senator Wyden and his wife, and a couple, Jim and Wendy Abrams, just very quiet. They had a little cake because his birthday was the 19th. And I got to ask President Clinton about some of the past moments. And he went in telling us about his train ride in 1996. And instead of, flying in on a private jet, it was a different climate. You would use it as almost a whistle-stop type of environment for his reelection. And then, of course, in 2000, just how important it would have been if Al Gore would have embraced Bill Clinton. He was sky-high still Clinton in the polls. He could have won a third term. But Gore chose, due to problems in the Clinton presidency, scandals, not to unleash Bill Clinton. And alas, that was a mistake for Al Gore. Most people think that he should have let Clinton go out and campaign heartily. So I think Kamala Harris is right. Bill Clinton to speak here, talk about bread and butter kitchen table issues, the economy, and hopefully use him, you would think, in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, where he would be an incredible surrogate because he still has a charisma to him. He's still able to draw people in and break down what real American life is. The best thing about Clinton is he talks to people, meaning he'll talk to somebody who works at a laundromat, he'll talk to somebody who's working on the street, and collectively he finds a way to understand the real economic concerns of the American public better than most politicians or presidents ever.
Doug, there have been a lot of comparisons drawn between this convention and that of 1968. I mean, do some circumstances remind you and sort of make you feel like time is a flat circle? I mean, for example, Lyndon B. Johnson had announced he wouldn't seek re-election, protests outside the convention hall, then against the Vietnam War, this time around the Israel-Hamas war.
It did ring my bell of 68. I wrote an essay for Vanity Fair recently about the comparisons. But in 68, once Lyndon Johnson stepped down March 31, he had already done badly in the New Hampshire primary. Johnson, his health had deteriorated. Eugene McCarthy, the senator from Minnesota, was already up and running. And, of course, then Robert F. Kennedy entered, won California primary, and was tragically killed. So when you got to Chicago, it really was a tinderbox. And Mayor Daley had overdone the police inside the convention hall. People like Dan Rather, the CBS reporter, was beat, journalists being tear-gassed outside. But those young people and other Americans, but particularly young people in 68, they were protesting about being drafted. They didn't want to go fight in Vietnam. They had a real stake in it. So it was much more contentious. This has sort of been contained, lower key, but that doesn't mean what's happening in the Gaza war isn't deeply significant, but it hasn't really affected the milieu within the United Arena except for perhaps hyper security precautions.
Doug Wrigley, always good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come, Donald Trump is trying to distance himself from Project 2025, but new CBS News reporting finds that the two may be more linked than he'd like. Our Vice President of Data Journalism joins us to explain. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here Comes the Sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm Lindsay Reiser. Here are some additions to our top stories. Night 3 of the Democratic National Convention is starting, featuring more party titans like former President Bill Clinton, Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, and Vice Presidential candidate Tim Walz set to speak. Some speakers are planning to address immigration in an effort to define policy under a possible Harris administration. While Vice President Harris will be the star speaker of the final night of the DNC tomorrow, the Obamas were the stars of night 2. Last night, former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama took to the stage to encourage voters to leave what they call the chaos of Trump's administration behind for a new chapter under Harris. On the Republican side of the 2024 race, former President Trump held his first outdoor rally today in North Carolina since his attempted assassination. Surrounded by bulletproof glass, Trump talked about national security, but also launched more personal attacks against Harris. You've probably been hearing a lot about Project 2025 this election cycle, especially during the Democratic National Convention. During Tuesday night speeches, multiple lawmakers held up an oversized cover of the project's proposal book. Democrats have used Project 2025 as a warning about what might occur if Trump wins a second term. But what is it? Curated by the Heritage Foundation, the 900-page initiative claims to be a, quote, comprehensive guide for the next conservative U.S. president. It offers several different proposals to create a sweeping overhaul of the executive branch. Donald Trump and his campaign are actively distancing themselves from Project 2025, with the former president even calling some of the recommendations, quote, abysmal. However, our CBS News data journalism team went through the project's documents line by line and found more than a third of the 735 proposals were aligned with Trump's past policies and current promises. John Kelly is the vice president of data journalism for CBS News and Stations. He joins us now to talk about the findings. So, John, of those 271 proposals you found that relate to Trump, how many were executive orders and official White House policies?
Right. We compared the language of the proposals in the document against policies that had already been implemented. And about 80 of them were things that were executive orders or rules and regulations within agencies during the first Trump term. Another 21 were that, as well as things that the former president has repeated on the campaign trail, reiterating his support for.
What about your analysis about former Trump administration officials and their connection to Project 2025?
We went back and looked at the work histories for all 38 of the people that are listed as primary authors of the report, including the 2 leaders of Project 2025. And 28 of those 38 people worked during the Trump administration, during that first term, working everything from senior advisors to agency officials and leaders of large projects.
271 proposals out of 735 are aligned with Trump. Where do the rest of the proposals come from?
There's a combination of things, and it's important to talk about, right? Because the former president is distancing himself from this, saying this is not my report, which is true. It was produced by the Heritage Foundation and some of their allies in the conservative political world. The others are undetermined. Some are things that Trump has specifically opposed, actually. Several abortion restrictions, which are some areas, a ban on TikTok, both things that he has said during this campaign, that he would leave abortion regulation to the states and that he has changed his mind on a ban on TikTok. A lot of the others, because of the language in the document is being vague or very, very detailed in some cases, or, and then trying to match that up to things that Trump has put out in his platform or that his campaign has issued. We wanted to be very conservative there. And so there are a lot of these where there might be some overlap, but we didn't feel like we could deem them as exact matches to his either past actions or future promises. So we wanted to be careful there.
Because you have gone through this with a fine-tooth comb, what else stuck out to you in your reporting?
I think it's interesting, that there has been a lot of conjecture about the report, right, on both sides of the political aisle and a lot of talk about it. And it seemed like regardless of the fact that the former president had said he was not involved, it felt important that the thing that mattered within the document is that it is a policy roadmap. It's a blueprint for an administration. And it felt like the most important thing to do was drill into the actual words. What are the actual things that are being proposed? And how are those things lining up with the very voluminous campaign documents, on Trump's campaign website and the proposals that he's made and the things that he has said at his rallies, and really focusing on those policies is the place. And certainly that number includes some of the standard fare for Republican politicians for decades: reduced taxes, less regulation, reducing the size and spending of government. But a lot of them are the kind of policies that people have been talking about and raising real questions about, related to gender ideology and his pledge to remove protections for racial and ethnic groups and do mass deportations. Some of the things that really got people fired up, those are things that do match up directly with what he's saying in speeches on the trail and what he's done when he was president before.
John Kelly, appreciate your reporting. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Less than a mile away from the convention center in Chicago, there was a standoff last night between police and an escaped fugitive. Joshua Zimmerman had been facing charges of attempted murder and armed robbery when he evaded officers at a courthouse in Mississippi more than 2 months ago. Authorities said he changed out of his inmate jumpsuit and got into regular clothes before he escaped. He was found at a restaurant in Chicago last night where he barricaded himself. He was then taken into custody without incident. A federal judge in Texas has blocked a nationwide ban on non-compete agreements from taking effect next month. The regulation issued by the Federal Trade Commission would have made it easier for workers to quit their jobs and go to a competitor. But the judge ruled the FTC didn't have the proper authority to implement the ban. The agency says it's considering an appeal. The FTC says an estimated 30 million workers, or nearly 1 in 5 Americans, have non-compete agreements with their employers. Ford is dropping plans to develop fully electric SUVs. It will instead focus on making hybrid vehicles. The automaker said the change was designed for customers looking for lower-priced vehicles with larger ranges. The market for EVs has dwindled, with one AAA report citing concerns over driving range as well as high cost and a lack of public chargers. AAA also reported nearly 2/3 of potential car buyers said they were unlikely to purchase an EV for their next vehicle. Ford did announce plans for an electric commercial van and new pickup trucks, which are set to roll out in 2026. We're following another round of high temperatures. The National Weather Service says heat warnings and advisories are in effect across the southern plains, affecting nearly 25 million people. For more, here's Alex Wilson from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Well, we've enjoyed the preview of fall, but temperatures, they are on the rise once again. So the number of people below average will be going down. Today, we've had 156 million people with below average temperatures. Tomorrow, 105 million, 53 million below average by Friday. A lot of those, though, in the west. So across the east and central part of the country, temperatures are going back up. Summer returns. Look at tomorrow's highs. Still comfortable through a lot of the northeast, especially down in the Appalachians as well. And I think even in Nashville, Atlanta, you're back into the mid-80s, but it's not too bad. Numbers really rising into the weekend and the start of next week. By Monday, 135 million people back above average, many spots into the 90s for highs. There's Saturday's highs, 80s and 90s across the board. I mentioned a lot of spots into the 90s by early next week. Florida, we're going to stay stormy. Plenty of moisture, a stalled front, going to keep things unsettled over the next few days. Rainfall rates could be as high as 3 to 5 inches, and then we're watching an invest could bring impacts to Hawaii. For more in-depth coverage, watch the Weather Channel on cable and now live on your favorite TV streaming device.
Alex Wilson, thank you. New flashpoints in the South China Sea. Chinese and Philippine Coast Guard ships collided in the region. How the U.S. could respond to protect its allies. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discovery, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
As we have been covering the Democratic National Convention, this year's presidential election will also set the course for relations with China and how the U.S. is going to defend its allies in the region. This week, tensions continue to escalate in the South China Sea. Multiple collisions occurred between Coast Guard ships belonging to China and the Philippines, a key U.S. ally. At least 2 vessels were damaged. Those incidents took place near the Sabina Shoal, a highly disputed area about 85 miles from the Philippines' west coast. Both countries blamed each other for the collisions. Greg Poling joins me for more. He is a senior fellow and the director of the Southeast Asia program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Greg, good to have you. Why has the Sabina Shoal become a flashpoint in the territorial disputes between China and the Philippines, and what led to the recent collisions?
Well, there's nothing that special about this shoal, but it's one of those hundreds of coral reefs that China lays claim to in the South China Sea, despite the fact that international law says that it belongs to China's Southeast Asian neighbors. In this case, the Philippines. As you said, the thing's only about 80 miles from the coast of the Philippines and more than 650 from the coast of China. What led to this incident is that the Philippines was just trying to go by the shoal to resupply a military outpost it has on another island, and the Chinese Coast Guard tried to block their path, which led to these 2 collisions.
China has warned the U.S. not to intervene in South China Sea disputes. How is the U.S. assessing this situation?
This is extremely dangerous. You know, the U.S., we hear so much about Taiwan and other flashpoints, but the South China Sea is the one that I think everybody's worried we could wake up tomorrow. You could hear about an incident like this that nobody expected that leads to an exchange of fire between China and a U.S. treaty ally, the Philippines. So it's certainly something that I think keeps military advisors and others in Washington up at night because of the unpredictable nature of this dispute.
If that were to happen, what would the U.S. response be?
Well, that's largely up to the Philippines. But U.S. officials in both the Trump and Biden administration have been clear that these areas are covered by the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty, our oldest treaty alliance in Asia. And if China kills Filipinos, we are legally and morally obligated to respond in whatever way the Philippines wants.
You mentioned politics. What kind of policy impact could the November election have on this region, including the conflict here and with Taiwan?
You know, the Philippines and most Southeast Asian governments are less worried about a Trump or a Harris administration than some of our other allies, particularly in Europe. In the case of the Philippines, they feel pretty good either way. They viewed Trump as tough on China, even though he didn't have much to say about the South China Sea. And they feel like Harris is a known quantity. She became the first vice president to ever visit Palawan, the part of the Philippines closest to the South China Sea, and has had a big role in advancing this U.S.-Philippine alliance that's under a renaissance right now.
But in a Trump administration, I mean, Trump has sort of avoided the idea of whether the U.S. would come to its defense, right?
Well, Trump himself never said the word South China Sea in a public speech in 4 years in office. But it was Mike Pompeo, when he was Trump's Secretary of State, who went to Manila in 2019 and made this promise that the South China Sea is covered by the U.S.-Philippine alliance. So even if Trump himself doesn't care, you know, his government did, and his administration did invest in this alliance.
Greg Polling, thank you.
Thank you.
Longtime New Jersey Congressman Bill Pascrell has died at the age of 87. The 14-term Democratic representative was first elected to Congress in 1996. He led the fight to access former President Donald Trump's personal tax returns and is being remembered for his work on tax deductions, clean energy projects, and creating the Congressional Brain Injury Task Force. Pascrell died 70 days before the general election, so by law, county committee members need to select a new Democratic nominee by August 29th. Following the death of the world's oldest person, Guinness World Records has officially passed the title on to a 116-year-old woman in Japan. Tomiko Ituka was born in 1908. She got married when she was 20 and had 4 children. Ituka took up mountain climbing late in life, in her 70s, conquering the 10,000-foot-tall Mount Ontake twice. When she was 100, she scaled the steps to a sacred shrine without a walking stick. Her family attributes her long life to these hikes. Ituka assumes the world's oldest person title after Maria Brañas Morera died in Spain Monday at 117 years old. Earlier today, a teenager completed a walk of more than 1,600 miles from Texas to Washington, D.C. in order to raise awareness for Social Security reform. CBS's Natalie Brand was there to witness the end of this odyssey.
So this is day one. A trek more than 1,600 miles on foot over 40 days through 5 states. Eliseo Jimenez finishing strong, arriving at the nation's capital Wednesday, greeted by congressional staffers, cheers, and a candy bar.
Your almond joy that you've been wanting.
The 17-year-old started his journey on July 12th in his hometown of Lubbock, Texas, to raise awareness about the challenges facing his grandmother and her elderly neighbors struggling to get by on Social Security.
Their checks would be late or it just wasn't enough. So I decided to do something about it.
Earlier this year, Jimenez started his own nonprofit to help any way he could. He says his walk helped raise more than $20,000.
What was the hardest part of your journey?
Definitely being away from my family, I think, and then the heat.
Carrying only a single backpack full of supplies, Jimenez suffered blisters, poison ivy, and at times slept on public benches. But the kindness of strangers kept him going.
Along the way, I found a few nice people that let me stay in their house here and there, and even a church. On this trip, I learned that the nation's actually pretty unified and everyone's pretty lovely.
While in D.C., Jimenez met with staff from his Texas congressman's office to talk about what can be done to address issues with Social Security. He'll fly back home just in time to start his senior year of high school.
I'm going to have one hell of a college essay, I'll tell you that.
And will continue to push for change. Natalie Brand, CBS News, Washington.
Like that he found the country's unified. Tonight, Tim Walz makes his mark on the DNC. Coming up, we'll check back in with John Dickerson during this critical moment for the Democratic vice presidential nominee. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are. Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift, stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz formally accepts the Democratic nomination for vice president. While the focus is on Walz, delegates will also hear from former President Bill Clinton and Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. We're back with John Dickerson at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. John, what are you watching for tonight?
Well, Lindsay, let's start with the man of the evening, vice presidential candidate Tim Walz, and then we'll go to Clinton. Last night here, the second night of the Democratic Convention, it was like politics night at the dance club. There were celebrities everywhere. There was music. There were the two biggest celebrities in politics right now, Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. It was a night of all of the crackling parts of the culture that the Democratic Party wants to access as they try to convince voters and get people to pay attention who don't vote before. Tim Walz is the kind of person who has to text his kids to find out who all those people who showed up at last night at the DNC were. He is the normal guy, and that's kind of his pitch and his place in the campaign. They put out a video of Tim Walz, which is narrated by his wife, and it is thick with his kind of roots of the country, small town, farms, schools. I mean, think about his career. He is a politician, was in the House, and obviously he's a governor, but I mean, school teacher, he's not a lawyer. And it really emphasizes, and the pitch about his bio really emphasizes that. There's also a policy emphasis in this video about him that I'll be watching for to see how much of that comes out in the speech he gives, which is there are a lot of progressive items that he got passed in Minnesota. Family and medical leave, for example, legalization of marijuana use. In the video, it talks about how he passed the largest tax cut in Minnesota, how it is a state that is wonderful to do business in, and that he's a gun owner and a hunter. emphasizing certainly more conservative, middle of the road, you might say, policies, not those policies that progressives have been pushing for. So how much of that will be a part of his pitch to kind of add balance to the ticket? Because at the end of the day, what a vice president does is reflects up to the candidate. And so it seems that this is about balancing out any possible views that Kamala Harris is too liberal. Now to Bill Clinton. He is they used to call him explainer-in-chief, and he has played that role for himself, certainly all the way back to 1992, but then, of course, in 2012 for Barack Obama. So will he explain this race in a new way we haven't seen before? That's what I'm looking for tonight from him.
All right, John Dickerson in Chicago, thanks so much. And thank you for watching. A special edition of America Decides begins after the break. You're streaming The Daily Report on CBS News 24/7.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this.
What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?